The house Daniel built. The locks were changed before Daniel even got home from his cardiologist appointment. He stood on the porch of the house he'd paid off 11 years ago, keys that no longer worked trembling in his hand, and through the window he watched his son laughing on the couch, his couch, like nothing in the world was wrong. Daniel didn't knock, he smiled instead, because in his coat pocket was a business card he'd been saving for exactly a day like this one. 3 days earlier, none of this would have seemed possible. Daniel Whitfield was 64 years old, a retired electrician with a bad hip, a good heart, recently confirmed slightly less good by an EKG, and a house on Maple Cross Lane that he had built from a down payment, 22 years of overtime, and a marriage that hadn't survived to see the mortgage paid off. His wife Carol had left when their son Bryce was 14, chasing something shinier in Arizona. Daniel had stayed. He'd raised the boy alone, coached his little league team even after his knees gave him hell, sold his truck to help pay for Bryce's community college tuition, and when Bryce's marriage to a woman named Kayla fell apart 2 years ago, Daniel had opened his door without a second thought. "Just till I'm back on my feet, Dad," Bryce had said, dragging 2 suitcases and a flat screen into the guest room. 2 years, that's how long back on my feet had taken. In that time, Bryce had gotten a new girlfriend, a sharp-eyed woman named Priya who worked in wealth strategy, whatever that meant, and somewhere in the last 6 months, Daniel's house had started to feel less like his and more like a hotel he was being tolerated in. He noticed the signs the way you notice a leak before you see the water damage. Bryce stopped asking before having people over. Priya started rearranging Daniel's kitchen, tossing out spice jars that had sat in the same place for a decade because they were expired, obviously. Small things, then bigger ones. Bryce mentioning, almost casually, that Daniel's disability parking placard made the driveway look bad when the neighbors came by. Priya suggesting Daniel might be more comfortable somewhere smaller, somewhere with people his own age. Daniel had laughed that one off at the time. He wasn't laughing anymore. Because 2 nights ago, Bryce had sat him down at the kitchen table, the same table Daniel had built with his own hands out of reclaimed oak the year Bryce was born, and told him, in the calm, rehearsed voice of a man who'd practiced this speech in a mirror, that it was time for a change. "Priya and I have been talking," Bryce said. "You've done so much for me, Dad, and we appreciate it, we really do. But this is supposed to be my house now. I mean, I live here. It doesn't make sense for you to still be, like, in charge of everything." "In charge of everything," Daniel repeated slowly. "Bryce, my name is on the deed. This is my house." Bryce had the decency to look uncomfortable for exactly 1 second before Priya's hand found his shoulder, and something in his spine straightened back up. "We think it'd be healthier for everyone," Priya said, smiling the way flight attendants smile when they tell you the plane's delayed, if you found your own place. "Bryce has needs too, Daniel. He's 31. He shouldn't be living with his father. He shouldn't be living with his father in his father's house, that he moved into willingly 2 years ago and never left." Daniel wanted to say it. He wanted to laugh in her face. Instead, something colder and more useful settled into his chest, the same feeling he used to get right before he found the short in a wiring job that had stumped 3 other electricians. A clean, quiet certainty. "Give me a few days to think about it," Daniel said. He should have seen it coming faster than he did. 2 days later, he'd gone to his cardiologist appointment, the one Bryce had, strangely, insisted on driving him to, then insisted on picking him up a little early from, and by the time Daniel got home, his key didn't fit the front door anymore. That's where our story really begins, on the porch, smiling. Daniel didn't bang on the door, he didn't call out. He simply took out his phone, and instead of calling Bryce, he called a number he'd saved 3 days ago under a name that made Bryce's blood run cold the one time he'd glimpsed it on Daniel's lock screen. Marcus Feld and Rourke Realty. "Marcus," Daniel said when the line picked up. "It's Daniel Whitfield. Change of plans. I need you at the house today. Now actually, if you can manage it." There was a pause, then a chuckle on the other end. "Today, Daniel, I thought we said end of the month, once your son had time to." "He's changed my locks, Marcus." Another pause, longer this time. "He did what?" "You heard me, so no, we're not waiting till end of month. Bring the sign, bring the paperwork, bring everything." Marcus Feld had been Daniel's realtor 22 years ago, when Daniel bought the house on Maple Cross Lane as a young married man with a baby on the way and a fistful of overtime pay. Marcus had aged into one of the most respected agents in the county, the kind of man who golfed with judges and had his photo on every third bus bench in town. He was also, not coincidentally, one of the few people who'd watched Daniel raise Bryce alone, who'd seen what that man had sacrificed to keep a roof over his son's head. 3 days ago, sensing which way the wind was blowing in that house, Daniel had quietly called Marcus for just some information. Now that information was about to become a very loud action. By the time Marcus's silver Lexus pulled into the driveway 40 minutes later, Bryce had noticed his father still standing on the porch and had come to the door, not to let him in, Daniel noted, but to talk through the screen like Daniel was a salesman he was trying to get rid of. "Dad, look, I know this seems harsh, but we talked about." "You talked," Daniel said. "I listened. There's a difference, son." That's when Marcus stepped out of his car in a sharp grey suit, a folder tucked under his arm, a real estate sign, the kind with a metal frame and a realty company logo, resting against his shoulder like a rifle. Bryce's face went the color of old drywall. "Mr. Feld," Bryce said. "What's Dad? What is this?" "This," Daniel said, "is Marcus. He's going to help me sell the house." "Sell the?" Bryce's voice cracked. Priya appeared behind him in the doorway now too, arms crossed, her earlier flight attendant's smile long gone. "Dad, you can't sell the house. I live here." "You lived here," Daniel said, "as my guest, for 2 years. And about 10 minutes ago, that guest changed the locks on his host, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Marcus, is not exactly standard house guest behavior." Marcus, already walking the front lawn with the practiced ease of a man who'd done this 1,000 times, set the sign down at the edge of the property, angled so it would catch the eye of every car that passed. "For sale, FVLD and ROURKE Realty." In smaller script beneath, "Call for a private showing." "Deeds in your name alone, Daniel?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. He'd pulled the title records 2 days ago. "Sole owner," Daniel confirmed. "Bought it before I married Carol, kept it in my name through the divorce. Every mortgage payment, every repair, every dollar came out of my pocket. Bryce isn't on a single piece of paper for this house. Never has been." Bryce shoved the screen door open now, stepping out onto the porch in his socks, face flushed. "You're actually doing this. You're going to sell the house out from under me because I asked you to move out." "You didn't ask," Daniel said, and for the first time his voice wasn't calm anymore. It had an edge to it, sharpened by 2 years of silence he was finally done keeping. "You changed the locks, Bryce, on your own father. A man with a heart condition your girlfriend has heard about in detail, because I made the mistake of trusting her with it. You didn't ask me to leave. You locked me out and left me standing on my own porch with nowhere to go, and you didn't even have the decency to be here when it happened. You had your cardiologist appointment timed. You timed it." Priya's mouth opened, then closed. Bryce didn't deny it. "It wasn't supposed to go like this," Bryce muttered. "No," Daniel agreed. "It was supposed to go the way you and Priya planned it in whatever conversation happened at this table without me. Get the old man to agree to move out quietly, keep the house, keep everything I built, and everyone stays comfortable. Except I never agreed to anything. I said I'd think about it. And I did think about it, Bryce. I thought about the 22 years of overtime. I thought about selling my truck for your tuition. I thought about every Christmas I spent alone after your mother left, because I didn't want to bring some stranger around and confuse you. And then I thought about you standing in that kitchen with her hand on your shoulder, telling me I don't belong in the house I paid for." Marcus, tactful as ever, had drifted a respectful distance away, ostensibly checking something on his phone, though Daniel suspected he was recording every word for posterity, or possibly for his own grandchildren as a cautionary tale. "So here's what happens now," Daniel continued. "This house goes on the market. Marcus tells me comparable homes on this street are going for just north of 400,000. I'm going to take that money, and I'm going to buy myself a small, quiet, one-bedroom condo about 40 minutes from here, in a building with an elevator, because apparently my hip and my heart make me an inconvenience to people who used to call me Dad with something like love in their voice. And whatever's left over, I'm going to enjoy, because I earned every bit of it alone, while you two figured out how to redecorate my kitchen." "Where am I supposed to live?" Bryce's voice cracked again, no longer angry now, just scared. 22 years old Daniel remembered in that voice, the same crack it had when Bryce was 9 and broke his arm falling off his bike and didn't want to admit how much it hurt. For a moment, something in Daniel's chest twisted. This was still his boy. Somewhere under the entitlement and the girlfriend's whispered advice was still the same kid who used to fall asleep in the passenger seat of Daniel's truck, head against the window, trusting his father to get him home safe. But trust, Daniel had learned rather abruptly this week, only runs one direction in some families. "That," Daniel said quietly, "is a very good question. It's the same one I was asking myself an hour ago, standing on this porch with keys that don't work. I don't know the answer, son, but I know it's not going to be this house and it's not going to be my problem to solve. You're 31 years old. You had a job. You have or had a life before you moved back in here, just until you got back on your feet. It's time to get back on your feet somewhere else. Priya, sensing the tide had fully turned, tried one last angle. Mr. Whitfield, surely we can discuss this like adults. There's no need to be vindictive. Vindictive, Daniel said, turning to look at her properly for the first time, would have been calling a locksmith myself the day you moved your toothbrush into my bathroom and started throwing out things that weren't yours to throw out. Vindictive would have been kicking you both out the first time I heard you telling my son in my kitchen that I was a lot to manage. I didn't do any of that. I gave you 2 years of my patience and my roof. This isn't vindictive. This is a man selling his own house. It's the single least dramatic thing I could possibly be doing right now, all things considered. Marcus cleared his throat gently from the lawn. Daniel, I've got a young couple, teachers, actually, nice folks, who have been looking in this neighborhood for months. I could probably get them through for a walkthrough by Thursday, if that works. Thursday's fine, Daniel said, not breaking eye contact with his son. Bryce, Priya, you'll want to be out by then. I'd say you can take your time, but given the circumstances, I think we're all better off moving quickly. The house sold in 11 days, 4,000 over asking, to the teachers Marcus had mentioned, a young couple expecting their first child, who cried actual tears of joy when Daniel handed them the keys on closing day and told them, unprompted, about the oak tree in the backyard that his own father had planted the week Daniel was born, 40 years before Daniel built the house around it. Bryce moved into a 1-bedroom apartment across town with Priya, who, according to a mutual friend Daniel still spoke to occasionally, left him 4 months later for a man who owned actual property instead of squatting in someone else's. Daniel bought his condo, small, quiet, with an elevator and a view of a park where he'd started walking every morning, hip be damned. He put the leftover money into a modest fund his cardiologist assured him would outlast several more EKGs. He got a dog, a scruffy terrier mix named Wrench, because apparently even at 64 a man can start over with something warm to come home to. Bryce called eventually, 6 weeks after the sale, hesitant, apologizing in the clumsy way people apologize when they're still not entirely sure what they did wrong, only that the consequences were larger than they expected. Daniel listened. He didn't hang up and he didn't forgive everything in one conversation either. Some doors, once locked, take longer to open again than others, and Daniel, for the first time in longer than he could remember, was in absolutely no rush. He had, after all, finally gotten his own set of keys.